Sechan had ridden all the way from his university hostel to his home on a bicycle. He was known for being an excellent rider, someone who had a natural command over his bike, navigating even the trickiest of roads with confident ease. The journey had been long, but it gave him a sense of peace. Upon arrival, his uncle Daniel, whom he affectionately referred to as Daddy, was the first to welcome him. With a friendly grin and his usual warmth, Daniel remarked that Sechan had arrived earlier than expected. Sechan, visibly delighted to see him, announced that he was finally home. But Daniel, with a mischievous smile and a teasing tone, placed a reassuring hand on Sechan's shoulder and told him that unfortunately, he wouldn't be playing the role of Daddy today. His voice held a light-hearted edge, but the underlying affection between them was clear. Daniel led Sechan inside, telling him that everything had already been arranged, and asked him about the trip. As they entered the living room, Sechan responded that the trip had been good calming, even. Daniel chuckled in response and suggested that perhaps it was time for Sechan to finally make the switch to a car. Sechan, however, shook his head with a grin and admitted that he still preferred motorcycle. Daniel, wearing a look of fatherly concern, mentioned that he had been thinking about selling the motorcycle. He then invited him over to the dining table, calling him warmly to join. The table had been thoughtfully arranged, filled with a variety of home-cooked dishes. A framed photograph of Sechan's parents sat at the head of the table, surrounded by flowers and small traditional offerings. Sechan's eyes widened as he took in the sight. He couldn't help but express his amazement, commenting that Daniel had really gone all out. Daniel replied that the setup resembled a Korean memorial service. He admitted that while it might not follow every formal tradition to the letter, what mattered most was the sincerity of honoring the day Sechan's parents had passed. Touched, Sechan stepped forward, bowed deeply before his parents' photo, and softly addressed them, Mom and Dad. He told them that on this day, he was greeting them as Sechantha Korean. His voice held a mix of pride and longing, as if speaking to their memory could bridge the distance between past and present. Daniel stood beside him, gazing at the photograph with emotion in his eyes. He gently spoke to the image of his brother, telling him not to worry about his son. He assured him that Sechan had grown into a fine young man. Then, looking at Sechan with pride in his eyes, Daniel commented that the two of them, him and Sechan's father, had done a spectacular job raising such a boy. Sechan's thoughts drifted back in time. A decade ago, when he was just 10 years old, tragedy had struck. His parents had died in a sudden accident, leaving him orphaned. With no immediate relatives to turn to, Sechan had been introduced to Daniel. Back then, he was just a frightened, grieving boy, lost in a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar and cold. Daniel had been a friend of Sechan's father. They had met when his father had traveled abroad to study. According to what Sechan had heard, the two had bonded instantly, brought together by a business idea Sechan's father had proposed. That very idea had helped Daniel's business soar, and their friendship had grown deeper and more meaningful over the years. Perhaps it was that strong bond, or simply Daniel's noble heart, that led him to adopt Sechan as his own. It had seemed to him like the only right thing to do, a natural step for someone like Daniela, man who lived by his sense of duty and honor. Now, years later, Sechan was doing his best to live up to that kindness. He was studying hard, determined to make Daniel proud, to someday repay him not just through words, but by becoming someone who could stand tall in the world. As these thoughts passed, a cheerful voice brought Sechan back to the present. A girl had entered the room with lively energy, and upon seeing him, she called out his name. Without hesitation, she rushed over and gave him a warm hug, asking when he had arrived. Sechan laughed and told her it had only been moments ago. With genuine delight, he greeted her by name Monica and said that it had truly been a long time. Monica agreed wholeheartedly, exclaiming that it had been far too long and that it was so good to see him again. She then asked how he had been and whether he had missed her. Sechan grinned and told her, without hesitation, that of course he had missed her. The two shared a comfortable laugh. Monica was Daniel's girlfriend, 17 years younger than him, yet full of confidence and charm. Daniel proudly mentioned that it had been Monica who had arranged the memorial service this year all on her own. Sechan looked at her with admiration and thanked her sincerely. Monica replied that she had prepared it with the kind of care a mother might give. Sechan playfully teased her, saying she couldn't possibly be like a mother to him after all. She was only 12 years older. They all laughed together, the air light with affection and familiarity. Daniel, clearly enjoying the moment, suggested they have a pool party that evening, just the three of them, and maybe even a barbecue. Monica agreed with enthusiasm, clapping her hands in excitement. Later that evening, they prepared for the party. As they gathered near the pool, Monica recounted the story of how she and Daniel had met. She told them that initially she had thought she had been rejected and assumed that was the end of it. But then, unexpectedly, Daniel had approached her again and asked for her number. Sechan listened with amusement, remarking that it was a sweet story. Monica, laughing brightly, said that if she had known Daniel was such a smooth talker, she might not have given him her number at all. Daniel shrugged with a smirk and joked that his charm was irresistible. As the evening wore on, Sechan observed how close the two had become. Though happy for them, he found himself growing tired and excused himself, saying that he hadn't been able to sleep during finals and needed to catch up on rest. Daniel gave a small pout and said he had been hoping to have a fun night now that Sechan was a grown man, but he nodded in understanding and told him to sleep well, saying they'd catch up more in the morning. After Sechan had gone to his room, Monica leaned toward Daniel and whispered that he had no idea how much Sechan had matured. Daniel agreed, noting that the boy had grown up fast. Monica joked that just like your protein bar. She then coyly asked what she should do next. Daniel raised an eyebrow and teased her back, saying that she probably had more ideas than he did and that she was definitely getting more mischievous. He reminded her to lower her voice in case Sechan heard them, but Monica waved the concern away, saying that Sechan was a grown-up now, and he definitely knew all about love and relationships. She added that Daniel himself had mentioned that Sechan had a girlfriend in college. Monica chuckled, saying the two must have had their share of fun already. Daniel clarified that Sechan had told him the relationship had ended within a month, and he was single again. Monica frowned in mock sympathy and said it was a shame that he was wasting his youth. Then, glancing at Daniel flirtatiously, she added that he was still more energetic and attractive than most younger men. Meanwhile, Sechan had been quietly peeking out from his room window, observing the two of them. He found Monica's balloons overwhelming, even a bit shocking. He thought to himself that he had never seen someone with that kind of stamina before. He shrugged off his guilt, reasoning that Monica wasn't even officially his stepmother, and besides, Daniel had a tendency to move on to new girlfriends anyway. As he peeked, Monica suddenly looked up and caught him watching. To his surprise, she winked at him playfully. Sechan's eyes widened in disbelief, and he quickly pulled away from the window, retreating into his room. His heart pounded as he wondered if he had imagined it, but he was certain Monica had definitely winked at him. That summer marked a turning point in Sechan's life. He had just turned 20 years old. The weather was hot, the days long, and everything had seemed relatively peaceful until one afternoon when an unexpected ring echoed from Daniel's doorbell. Standing on the doorstep were two unfamiliar girls, both appearing nervous yet determined. Without waiting for permission, they stepped inside the house and directly confronted Daniel. One of them looked at him intently and asked a question that immediately filled the air with tension. Was he their father? An unfamiliar energy swept through the house, unsettling Sechan, who had been used to a calm and quiet home environment. The blonde girl among them stepped further inside, and Sechan, slightly annoyed, pointed out that she should remove her shoes. She looked confused, asking why, but Sechan didn't respond. Instead, he thought to himself that his peaceful domain, which had been his sanctuary, had now officially been invaded. The two girls followed Daniel into the study room, where they began explaining everything. Sechan and Monica, curious and anxious, peered in from just outside. Sechan whispered that the situation seemed serious and told Monica to hang on, while Monica burst out in disbelief. She exclaimed loudly that none of this made any sense, asking how something so bizarre could happen so suddenly. Her voice rose in pitch as she continued to question Daniel's claim were these girls truly his biological daughters? One had blonde hair and a distinctly different appearance, while the other bore a faint resemblance to him. Sechan tried to calm Monica down, telling her to be quiet as he couldn't hear anything with her shouting. His curiosity got the better of him again, and he leaned in to listen. After a while, Daniel and the girls emerged from the study, and Daniel, now calmer, asked what all the fuss outside had been about. He noted that the earlier chaos had passed and that it was time for proper introductions. Gesturing toward the girls, he introduced the blonde one as Rebecca and the other as Michelle. He added, with a gentle smile, that they were both the same age as Sechan 20 years old. Sechan was visibly puzzled. He tilted his head and asked how they could be the same age. That would mean Daniel had fathered them both within the same year. The implication stunned him, and he voiced it aloud. Embarrassed, Daniel quickly reached out and placed his hand over Sechan's mouth, signaling him to stop talking. Realizing an explanation was necessary, Daniel began recounting what had happened 2 decades earlier. He had traveled alone to Vietnam and stayed in a modest guest house. During his time there, he met 2 women, one was European, the other Asian. Being Latin himself, the 3 of them had come from vastly different cultures and backgrounds, but youth and adventure had drawn them close. They quickly became friends and, as Daniel put it with a sheepish smile, ended up spending several passionate days together. He admitted that he had been called a playboy back then, and the consequences of those short-lived romances were the 2 young women now standing before them. He explained that Rebecca's mother had recently passed away due to a chronic illness, leaving her with no one to rely on. Rebecca, tall and elegant, had found herself alone. Michelle's situation was different. Their mother was about to marry a man who did not approve of women with children, forcing Michelle to become independent and find her own way in life. At that point, Monica interrupted again. She wasn't satisfied with the story and asked Daniel how he could be so sure that these girls were truly his daughters. She wanted to know if he had verified it properly. Daniel responded calmly, saying he had checked their mother's documents, conducted genetic and blood tests, and even confirmed their birth dates. He had spoken to Michelle's mother directly, ensuring there were no uncertainties. Still skeptical, Monica insisted she wanted to see the evidence herself. But before Daniel could respond, Rebecca spoke up. She said that it wasn't Monica's decision to make and added, somewhat coldly, that from what she had heard, Monica wasn't even family. That statement infuriated Monica, who demanded to know what Rebecca had just said. Tensions rose quickly between them, and it looked like an argument was about to break out. Sensing the escalation, Daniel stepped in firmly. He told them both to stop. He made it clear that he had already made his decision. They would all live together from that day forward. He admitted that he hadn't raised Rebecca or Michelle, but he considered them his daughters all the same and intended to take full responsibility for them. He urged everyone to be kind and respectful toward one another, emphasizing that they were now a family, and family deserved love and courtesy. Rebecca, trying to de-escalate the situation, apologized and said she'd take the blame for the earlier tension, offering a polite, "she is sorry." Daniel, preparing to leave for work, turned to Sechan and gave him a new responsibility. He was to be their guide. He told Sechan to teach them everything he had been taught and to help them adjust to their new life. Sechan hesitated but eventually agreed. He took their luggage and led the girls down the hallway toward their rooms. As they walked, Rebecca noticed Sechan's confused expression. She asked what was on his mind, but he shrugged it off, saying it was nothing. Internally, however, he couldn't shake a heavy feeling in his heart. Being adopted himself, he had grown up with love and care, lacking nothing. But now he realized that these 2 girls had spent their childhoods without a father figure. The thought unsettled him. When they reached the bedroom, he informed them that this would be their shared space. Rebecca looked around, impressed. She remarked that the room was bigger than hers had ever been. She seemed genuinely excited. Sechan clarified that the rooms were actually the same size. It was just the arrangement of the furniture that gave the illusion of space. In fact, he noted, their bed was smaller than his. Michelle pointed toward a door near the corner of the room and asked what lay beyond it. Sechan replied that it was a connecting door to his own room. Rebecca, still curious, asked him why his name was Kang Sechan and whether he had an English name. Sechan explained that Daniel had once asked if he wanted to change it, but since he had been called Sechan for as long as he could remember, it felt most familiar to him. Rebecca then asked if he truly considered Daniel his family. She pointed out that he had grown up in a large house and attended colleges. Surely life had been comfortable for him. Sechan wasn't sure how to interpret her tone. Was she being sincere or condescending? The uncertainty made him uncomfortable. Before the conversation could continue, Michelle asked them to leave so she could change. Sechan nodded and told her to rest, acknowledging that she had traveled a long way. Elsewhere, Daniel and Monica were driving together. During the ride, Monica asked if they were seriously going to live together from now on, just like that after suddenly discovering he had two grown daughters. Daniel laughed softly and asked why she was so anxious. He said it was a good thing that their family had grown unexpectedly. Monica raised an eyebrow and teased him, wondering aloud when exactly he had become such a dedicated family man, considering his notorious playboy past. Daniel smiled and replied that he was 50 years old now. He admitted that he had started to feel the desire to build something stable, a solid company, a loving family, and a future with reliable children. He added that having a woman to settle down with made the idea of growing older feel more meaningful. Monica looked at him incredulously and asked if he was joking. Was he really planning to settle down with just one woman? Daniel looked at her with sincerity and said that meeting a beautiful woman like her had changed his perspective. To him, settling down meant waking up beside her every morning. Monica, still processing his words, told him to stop the car. Then they start wrestling. Back at home, Sechan lay on his bed, restless. His thoughts kept drifting back to Rebecca. He couldn't deny that she seemed to have a complicated personality, yet she was undeniably beautiful. Stunning, even. And her figure only made it harder for him to keep his mind clear. But the shame of his thoughts quickly set in. What was he thinking? This girl was going to be part of his family now. He told himself he was out of his mind and needed some air. He stepped outside and walked into the lawn, hoping the fresh air would help. There, to his surprise, he found Rebecca practicing yoga. From the shadows, he observed her movements. She was graceful, focused, and clearly well practiced in her morning routine. Suddenly, she noticed him. Sechan froze, unsure of what to do now that she had caught him staring. Embarrassed, he decided to play it cool, walked over to greet her casually. He smiled awkwardly and asked what she was up to. Rebecca paused her pose, looked at him curiously, and asked, "So you came here?" Sechan approached Rebecca in the garden, surprised to see her there, and asked softly what she was doing outside so early. Rebecca called him over casually and invited him to join her in a few rehab stretches. Without hesitation, she began instructing him on the poses, demonstrating how to hold his stance. As he clumsily tried to follow, she laughed and guided him further, gesturing for him to press her legs gently to assist with the stretch. Uncertain but obedient, Sechan complied, placing his hands along her legs and pressing with caution. She nodded approvingly and told him to keep going just like that. Meanwhile, inside the house, Michelle wandered into Daniel's study. Alone in the room, she moved slowly, taking in her surroundings and silently observing the details of her father's personal space. Back in the garden, Sechan continued helping Rebecca with her rehabilitation. She directed him again on how to stretch her legs properly. He followed along, all the while thinking that the view from his position was quite something. Rebecca teasingly told him he was pathetically weak and just pretending to be okay. Her blunt comment made him pause and wonder whether he really appeared that feeble to her. He murmured that no one had ever called him weak before. Just then, Michelle appeared, walking into the garden and interrupting them. She asked how much longer they were going to take. Sechan jumped back in surprise and asked her what she needed. Michelle replied calmly that she wanted to find some kitchen utensils, but didn't know where they were. Grateful for the distraction, Sechan offered to help and quickly accompanied her to the kitchen. Once there, he pointed out the cabinets and drawers, showing her where the pots and other tools were kept. Michelle began preparing ingredients, and Sechan asked whether she was hungry and if he should go out and buy something for her. She replied that she wasn't cooking out of hunger, she simply wanted to try making a few dishes before the others arrived. His curiosity piqued. Sechan asked if she was referring to Daniel and commented that she looked tired and could simply rest instead. After all, Daniel had mentioned they might go out for dinner. Michelle shook her head and explained that she preferred to practice cooking, regardless. Sechan, trying to make conversation, asked if she was studying for a culinary certificate or specializing in European or Asian cuisine. Michelle grew visibly irritated his questions. She asked him bluntly to stop talking, saying she needed silence to concentrate on the cooking. Sechan quickly apologized, told her to call him if she needed anything, and left her in peace. That evening, the family gathered around the dining table. Michelle had prepared several dishes for everyone. As they began to eat, Daniel took a bite and looked astonished. He turned to Michelle and asked with disbelief whether she had really made all the food. Sechan chimed in, smiling and nodding proudly, saying that he had tried a bit earlier and found it amazing. Monica, who had been silently tasting the food, was also surprised by how delicious it was. Daniel looked fondly at Michelle and remarked that it was no wonder her mother had been an excellent cook as well. He added that it was admirable to see Michelle putting in such effort, even in a place that was still unfamiliar to her. He said he was proud that she was working so hard to support the family. Hearing this, Michelle stood up from her chair. Daniel looked at her, puzzled, and asked if she had something to say. Without responding at first, Michelle stepped forward and suddenly embraced him. Her voice trembled as she told him that she was deeply happy he had liked the meal. She admitted that since childhood she had always wanted to hear praise from her father, even just a little. Daniel smiled warmly and reassured her that there would be plenty more praise to come. The others at the table were stunned by the sudden emotional exchange. Sechan, observing Michelle, reflected on how curt and distant she had seemed earlier. The atmosphere now felt completely different. He wondered how someone who had appeared so cold was now radiating warmth. As the meal continued, Rebecca leaned over from her chair to reach for a side dish. In doing so, she brushed her arm against Sechan's, and to his surprise, she didn't move it away. She commented softly that the food was delicious as she reached for more. Sechan, distracted, couldn't help but notice her closeness and physical contact. Monica, seated across the table, took note of their behavior. Her gaze shifted from the two of them to Daniel, as if silently pondering what exactly was unfolding in their new, complicated family dynamic. After dinner, all the family members retreated to their respective rooms to rest. Sechan lay on his bed, lost in thought, replaying the events that had occurred between him and Rebecca. He kept wondering if what she had done was truly accidental. In his mind, it felt unmistakably intentional, and he couldn't make sense of the whole situation. Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone in his room, snacking and drinking alcohol to unwind. Monica joined him shortly after, asking how long he had been awake and whether he had been unable to sleep. Noticing his distant demeanor, she inquired further about what had him so deep in thought that he found himself drinking alone. Daniel admitted that he felt a strange restlessness and, for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, sleep had eluded him. When Monica pressed gently, asking what was bothering him, Daniel responded that it was difficult to put into words, but the experience of seeing his children grow up so well had left him with a peculiar feeling. He explained that lately, his life seemed to have gained richness and depth, and that he was beginning to feel the need for a stable family life before growing any older. Monica quietly reflected that perhaps his earlier comments hadn't been as casual as they seemed. She then hesitantly brought up Rebecca, asking what he truly thought about her. When Daniel asked her what she meant, Monica elaborated, saying that Rebecca's way of dressing seemed a bit excessive. Though Rebecca was an adult now, Monica admitted she didn't feel entirely comfortable with the way she carried herself. Daniel asked what point she was trying to make, and Monica cautiously suggested that since Sechan and Rebecca weren't biologically related and were both adults, didn't he think that could become a complicated situation? After all, one day a beautiful blonde had suddenly appeared in his daughter's life, and it wasn't entirely far-fetched to consider the implications. Daniel smiled gently at her, assuring her that there was no way either he or Sechan would ever look at Rebecca in such a way. He believed her usual attire wasn't as provocative as Monica was suggesting. Monica clarified that wasn't exactly what she meant, and Daniel playfully added that if someone truly beautiful were to be considered a threat, it would be Monica herself, not Rebecca. Laughing, Monica replied that comparing her to someone who hadn't even fully lost her baby fat wasn't quite fair. Daniel agreed with a grin and told her to stop overthinking things. He explained that he trusted Sechan more than anyone else and reminded her that his heart belonged to her alone. Looking at him, Monica asked if she should believe what he was saying. Daniel leaned in, suggesting that words weren't enough, they should exercise together. Monica, surprised by his sudden shift in tone, asked what he was doing and warned that the kids might wake up. Daniel teasingly questioned her concern, implying she didn't believe him. She laughed and remarked that it suddenly felt hot in the room. He admitted he'd had a drink and now craved something more than just snacks. Hinting toward a more excited moment, he insisted he wanted a cardio session with her. Monica playfully offered herself as his partner, and he flirted back, saying he could never refuse a woman like her. Unbeknownst to them, Michelle was standing upstairs, silently watching the scene unfold. The following morning, a cleaning session was already underway in the house. Rebecca, having just woken up, appeared frustrated and asked aloud why it was so noisy. Sechan, already up and about, reminded her that he had told her before once a week, people came to clean and maintain the house. Though it might be loud, he encouraged her to endure it. Daniel and Monica, now fully dressed, joined them. Daniel cheerfully asked if everyone had slept well. Sechan, noticing Daniel's elegant outfit, commented with admiration, asking where the two were headed. Daniel explained that he had a short meeting with a buyer in Canberra and that the trip could last a few days, depending on potential delays. Monica added that she was also planning to return home. Before leaving, Daniel turned to Sechan and entrusted him with looking after the house. Sechan assured him not to worry, he had it under control. Michelle chimed in with a wish for her father's safe travels, to which Daniel replied with warmth, saying they would all enjoy some fresh air together once he returned. Michelle approached Monica and complimented her appearance, saying she looked truly beautiful and that her dress was very pretty. Monica smiled and thanked her graciously. Michelle then noticed that the zipper of Monica's dress had become entangled with her hair and gently helped fix it. Monica, touched by the gesture, thanked her again and remarked that they would be back soon. It was time for them to leave. Before stepping out, Monica leaned closer to Daniel and commented on how Michelle seemed like a genuinely good child. Daniel nodded and brought up how many people had praised his outfit, pointing out Monica's excellent fashion sense. She grinned proudly and reminded him that she had managed to obtain a rare, limited edition item. Then the two of them finally left the house together. Left behind in the now quieter home were Sechan, Rebecca, and Michelle. Sechan found himself pondering what to do next. The atmosphere felt somewhat awkward now that only the three of them remained. Rebecca turned to him, mentioning that she'd heard there was a nice beach nearby. He agreed, noting that the house was already a mess, and suggested they head out. He offered to show her around the town while they were at it. From upstairs, Michelle called down, letting them know she wouldn't be joining. She said she was tired and would be staying in her room and wished them safety. Sechan glanced up at her, wondering why she had directed her words specifically at him. Michelle, now in her room, quietly examined a teardrop-shaped, expensive-looking brooch in her hand, the very one she had stolen from Monica's dress. Sechan had taken Rebecca into the garage, where he gestured toward the collection of vehicles and told her to take her pick. He asked which one she'd prefer to ride. Rebecca, visibly surprised by the number of luxury cars neatly arranged before her, asked why there were so many of them. Sechan explained that it was because his father, whom he called Daddy, had a deep love for cars. He then suggested the convertible, claiming it was perfect for a scenic drive. However, Rebecca pointed toward the motorcycle and said that she preferred that one instead. Sechan, slightly surprised but agreeable, responded by confirming her choice and saying, "That one, okay." Soon after, the two of them hopped onto the bike, with Rebecca seated behind Sechan. As they began riding, she asked whether that was all the speed it had and if it could go any faster. Sechan told her to hold on tightly, and without further delay, they sped off toward the beach. Upon reaching the beach, Sechan turned to her and asked if the place was suitable, commenting that it was well maintained. Rebecca responded that it wasn't bad at all and said she actually liked it, then asked if they should start having some fun. She untied her hair, letting it down, which prompted Sechan to ask what she was doing. She questioned back if he wasn't going to join her, and he responded that he was on his way. Just then, a boy unexpectedly appeared and accidentally flung a clump of sand that landed directly on Sechan's head. Visibly annoyed, Sechan looked up, only to realize the boy was someone from the school's rugby team. The boy, clearly startled by what had happened, apologized and asked if Sechan was all right. As Sechan looked at him more closely, he recognized the girl standing beside the boy. It was Anna, his ex-girlfriend. Surprised, Sechan asked Anna if she was really there. The boy, whose name turned out to be Chris, turned toward Anna and asked sarcastically if Sechan was the guy she had dated before the Asian guy. He mocked the idea, questioning why she would date someone with such a name, and insinuated that it must have been for money. Anna, visibly uncomfortable, scolded Chris for his behavior. It began to dawn on Sechan that Chris's behavior might be entirely intentional and targeted. Chris then turned to Sechan and, with a mocking tone, asked what the grumpy expression on his face was about. Sechan ignored the provocation and instead walked toward Anna, telling her that if she was going to date someone, she should at least choose a decent guy, implying that someone like Chris wasn't worth her. He added that she was too precious to be wasting her time with someone like him. Chris, now irritated, demanded to know what Sechan was even trying to say. At that moment, Rebecca appeared from behind, grabbed Sechan's arm, and asked what was going on. Chris, stunned by her sudden appearance, couldn't hide his shock. He struggled to believe that Rebecca could actually be Sechan's girlfriend. He wondered to himself if Sechan had won her over with money, noting how beautiful and elegant she was. While Sechan tried to make sense of the sudden confrontation, Chris turned to Rebecca and asked if she would like to play a game, proposing that the loser would buy beer. To his surprise, Rebecca accepted the challenge with enthusiasm, telling him to bring it on. Anna, clearly taken aback by Chris's impulsiveness, asked if he was serious and what game he was even talking about. Chris replied that it would be fun and insisted they play. The game of beach volleyball soon began. During the match, Rebecca launched a strong spike that landed directly on Chris's face, causing his nose to bleed and leaving him unable to defend himself. She then addressed him sternly, saying that he wasn't as special as he thought and certainly not considerate. As Chris lay on the ground unconscious, Anna rushed over and desperately tried to wake him up, urging him to open his eyes. People at the beach began gathering around to see what had happened. Meanwhile, Rebecca took Sechan's hand and led him away to a quieter corner of the beach. The two of them began drinking beer together. Sechan remarked about Chris's swollen face, speculating that it would probably take a week for the swelling to go down. He told her that one couldn't show weakness in front of guys like Galt Chris. The more weakness shown, the more one ended up being ridiculed. Sechan admitted that he was familiar with this kind of behavior and had experienced it since he was young. He said that boys like Chris often looked at him like he was a nobody. He also mentioned that Michelle had once said something similar. Rebecca expressed mild surprise and said that if he knew that, then he probably already understood her perspective. As she took another drink of beer, Sechan asked if she and Michelle had grown up together. Rebecca shook her head and explained that they had only met recently at her mother's funeral. At the time, she had assumed Michelle was just another mourner and had no idea that they were actually half-sisters. He asked gently whether she was doing all right, given that her mother had passed away not too long ago. Sechan then opened up about his own past, explaining that when his parents died when he was young, he had struggled immensely. He said he couldn't talk to anyone and cried a lot. However, he was able to overcome that pain thanks to his daddy, who had truly supported him. He added that if Rebecca was ever having a hard time, she could count on him as well, because they were family. Rebecca, looking distant, said that she liked her family, but then asked a curious question whether Sechan actually felt like they were siblings. He responded earnestly, saying that of course they were, since she was his daddy's daughter after all. Rebecca scoffed and called him a hypocrite. She said she wasn't going to stay with him for long anyway, so what was the point in talking about family? Confused, Sechan asked what she meant by that. She told him it should have been obvious she resented him for taking the place that should have been hers and growing up wealthy. She urged him to become independent as soon as possible. Sechan, trying to reason with her, asked why she was being like that. He said he truly believed their father still thought of her as family and wanted to accept her. Rebecca didn't respond to that directly. Instead, she suggested they begin a cardio session right there. Sechan, puzzled, asked what she was doing. She taunted him, saying he probably couldn't see her clearly because he had been staring at her body all day, and that maybe he didn't really see her as family. She asked if she was wrong. Sechan asked her to stop, but she went on, claiming that being a hypocrite was worse than getting excited about seeing one's family. She called him pathetic, saying he didn't even have the guts to be honest with himself. And at that moment, Sechan found himself deeply conflicted, wondering silently whether she was right, whether he truly lacked the courage to face his feelings. Sechan had made up his mind to begin a cardio session with Rebecca. But just when he was ready, she didn't appear so willing anymore. Her resistance was obvious as she demanded to know what he thought he was doing, urging him to let her go. His frustration surfaced quickly, and he responded coldly, questioning why he should stop. He reminded her of her earlier words, accusing her of assuming he didn't have the courage to act like this. He pointed out that she had said it herself that he lacked the guts. Rebecca retorted fiercely, shouting that he couldn't force her to go through this workout. She even threatened to kill him if he didn't back off. Sechan stood stunned, thinking how unusual her reaction was. Meanwhile, back at the house, Michelle was seen thanking the cleaning staff as they finished up. She expressed gratitude for their hard work, and one of the workers smiled, saying they would be back again next week. After they left, Michelle walked quietly into her father's study. Once inside, she began scanning the bookshelves, pulling out volumes one by one and flipping through them. As she sifted through the books, she thought to herself that none of them seemed particularly interesting or out of place. Still, her behavior suggested that she had a purpose for being there. She appeared focused, perhaps searching for something specific, convinced that whatever she needed to find had to be somewhere in that room. Elsewhere by the beach, Sechan and Rebecca continued the exercise. Rebecca looked drained and breathless, begging for it to stop. But Sechan noticed something odd while her words were filled with resistance. Her body didn't push him away with much strength. Her face had turned red, sweat clung to her skin, and though she was being rude, her physical reaction seemed to contradict her tone. Again, she threatened that she would kill him, but suddenly the atmosphere changed. Chris arrived at the beach with a group of his friends, all of them looking around and calling out Sechan's name. Chris expressed frustration, convinced that Sechan had already escaped. One of his friends questioned the effort they were putting in, suggesting they just give up and relax instead. Hearing them nearby, Sechan quickly dragged Rebecca behind a large rock for cover. Alarmed, he thought to himself how bizarre it was that Chris had actually brought a group of people to hunt him down. It felt absurd. He crouched lower, trying to stay out of sight. Chris's friends began to question him curiously. One asked if it was true that he got hit by a girl. Chris snapped at him to shut up, saying he had simply let his guard down. Another friend, still confused, asked why Chris seemed to hate the Asian guys so much. Chris admitted that he felt insulted by the fact that Sechan had dated his ex-girlfriend. He added darkly that once he found them, he would show them what karma looked like. Still hiding behind the rock, Sechan and Rebecca tried to keep quiet and finish their exercise session in whispers. Sechan told her that maybe they should stop now. Then, he urged her to stay silent, reminding her of the consequences if they got caught. He noted to himself that although she kept protesting, she was already soaked with sweat. Her body language spoke differently than her words. Meanwhile, Chris's friend shifted the topic, asking if the girl Chris was talking about was really that special. Chris replied smugly that she was indeed amazing and said he was planning to catch her and punish her. The friend, in a casual tone, then asked if they could possibly trade if Chris could give him Anna instead. Chris looked both angry and confused, demanding to know what his friend was talking about. The friend, unfazed, pointed out that Chris wasn't seriously dating her and was also seeing someone named Sarah. Chris admitted that even though he had no intention of dumping Anna, he still hadn't explored everything with her. He commented that Sechan had proven to be more trained than he had anticipated. The friend grinned, saying that if things worked out with Sarah, Chris could always hand over Anna to him. From behind the rock, Sechan was listening to the entire exchange, feeling disgusted by what he was hearing. He thought to himself that they were all just garbage. Still, he knew this wasn't the time to confront them. He couldn't afford to be caught. At that moment, one of Chris's friends noticed a beer bottle lying near the rocks. He looked down and pointed out that there were 2 sets of footprints in the sand. Chris grew suspicious immediately, wondering aloud if Sechan and Rebecca were hiding somewhere close. Sechan had just come to a disturbing realization. Chris and his friends were nearby, and they were moments away from getting caught. Panic began to rise in his chest as he thought about what would happen if they were discovered. It wasn't just about him anymore. If Rebecca got caught with him, the consequences might be even worse for her. His thoughts spiraled as he crouched behind the rock, desperate to think of a way out. Chris, suspicious, stepped closer to the rock and mentioned to his friend that something about it seemed odd. Sechan's heart pounded. It felt like they were about to be exposed. He held his breath, trying to hide as best as he could. Then, out of nowhere, Anna stormed onto the scene, yelling furiously at Chris. She demanded to know how he could break up with her just because they hadn't done a workout session together. Her voice was loud and sharp as she declared she never wanted to see him again, nor his trashy friend. Chris, startled and flustered, stammered that he had only been joking. With that, he and his friend quickly backed off and walked away. As the coast cleared, Sechan peeked out from behind the rock, whispering a relieved, "Thank God!" But his relief was short-lived. Rebecca, now furious, slapped him across the face. Her voice trembled with hurt as she accused him of causing her pain. Sechan followed after her, trying to explain, but she turned and warned him to stay away unless he wanted trouble. She pushed his hand away with disgust. Eventually, they returned home. By then, Sechan had fully realized the weight of what had happened. Rebecca was clearly angry, and he couldn't blame her. Still caught up in his thoughts, he didn't notice Michelle standing behind them until she spoke up. She casually commented that it looked like they had a fight, though she didn't know the details. Then she added that Rebecca was strange anyway, so she often tried to avoid speaking to her. Sechan looked at Michelle in surprise, thinking that she had no idea how serious the situation really was. Michelle advised him to take a shower, saying they'd have dinner afterward. She mentioned she would go get Rebecca. He nodded silently and went to freshen up. Meanwhile, Rebecca sat alone in her room, deep in thought. The entire beach incident replayed in her mind. She couldn't believe what had happened. She had seen Sechan as nothing more than a naive kid, but now she felt betrayed. What he had done was beyond forgiveness. Michelle entered the room, raising an eyebrow as she asked if things were going according to Rebecca's plan. Rebecca smirked and assured her not to worry. In her view, guys were simple, they just needed to be manipulated a little and they'd go crazy. Michelle wasn't convinced. She asked bluntly if Rebecca just didn't know how to keep a boyfriend. Laughing it off, Rebecca told her she clearly didn't understand men and should sit back and watch her work. As Michelle looked around the room, she remarked that it was larger than hers. Rebecca changed the topic, asking if Michelle was handling things on her end. Michelle confidently replied that everything was under control, assuring Rebecca that the girl she was targeting would be pushed out soon. Downstairs, Sechan sat at the dining table, imagining the worst. His thoughts wandered to what might happen if Rebecca told Michelle everything. In his mind, he pictured his uncle, his daddy, furious, shouting at him for betraying the family. He imagined being thrown out of the house with nothing. Coming back to reality, Sechan scolded himself. He couldn't believe how far things had gone. He hadn't meant for any of it to happen. He blamed Rebecca for provoking him, trying to convince himself that it wasn't entirely his fault. Just then, Rebecca and Michelle joined him at the table. Michelle teased that Rebecca didn't seem to enjoy the beach trip and claimed she'd come back disappointed. Sechan looked surprised and repeated, "Really?" Michelle smiled and told them to focus on dinner. He mumbled that he thought Rebecca liked it. Quietly, he realized she had told Michelle a different version of the story, probably because she was too embarrassed to share what actually occurred. In the middle of dinner, Sechan received a call from his uncle. He picked up, telling him they were all having dinner. Michelle quickly asked him to switch it to a video call. Once he did, Michelle's expression lit up. She greeted their father warmly and asked if he had arrived safely. He replied that he had just gotten time to call after a busy arrival. Then he asked if they were all doing well. Michelle answered enthusiastically that they were getting along fine and there was no need for concern. Rebecca also joined in, casually mentioning that Sechan had taken her to the beach. Their father smiled at the news and said it made him happy to hear that his children were spending time together. Rebecca added that he should enjoy his trip and not worry about them. Sechan, however, couldn't hide his confusion. He stared at Rebecca, wondering why she was putting up such an act. Later that night, Sechan lay on his bed, staring at his phone. He remembered the harsh words Rebecca had thrown at him, how she hated him for taking her place and growing up with privilege. She had told him to leave as soon as possible. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. Unable to sit still, he got out of bed and stepped into the hallway. In the TV lounge, he noticed Michelle had fallen asleep in front of the television. He watched her quietly, thinking that she must have dozed off. For a moment, he reflected on how Michelle and Rebecca didn't seem especially close despite living under the same roof. Meanwhile, Rebecca was still in her room, thinking about what had happened. Frustration churned inside her. The memory of the beach incident was fresh, and she couldn't believe she had let her guard down. The very idea that she had considered someone like Sechan as more than a foolish kid now embarrassed her. It was humiliating. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Annoyed, she wondered who could be disturbing her at such an hour. Instead of answering, she turned off the light and pretended to be asleep. Quietly, Sechan entered the room, assuming she was already sleeping. As he stepped closer and watched her lying there, he realized that he had come hoping to talk. Looking at her face in the dim light, he thought to himself how beautiful she was. Rebecca, pretending to sleep, was fully aware of his presence and wished he would just leave. But he didn't. Instead, he gently reached out and held her hand. Rebecca's mind raced. What was he trying to do? At the same time, Sechan was battling his own impulse, uncertain of what to say or how to act. Something about the moment pulled at him, and though he didn't quite understand it, he knew one thing. He wanted to be closer to her. And so he made a decision in that moment that would join her in her workout session with her. He was looking at her and thinking to himself how irritating it was that she was still pretending to be asleep. Hypocrisy, he thought, was the worst kind of behavior. Yet, he decided to test her patience and wondered how long she could keep up the act. She, meanwhile, was feigning sleep and wondering just how far he intended to push this game. Suddenly, he opened her eyes and told her to stop. She explained that she had pretended to be asleep so he wouldn't feel embarrassed, but added firmly that they couldn't go any further before she slapped him again. Despite this, he was determined not to show any weakness in front of her. He teased, asking if she was really just trying to avoid embarrassment or if she was secretly enjoying his foreplay. She responded by telling him he had gone crazy and demanded that he leave her room. He grabbed her hand and shouted, questioning what she was doing. He reminded her that she had gotten very excited when he trained her during the yoga session earlier. She insisted he let her go and called him a weird man, but internally he found it strange how her cursing seemed to excite him. She threatened to kill him, but he urged her to accept it and stop pretending to be tough. He kept telling her to stop lying, realizing now that he had some control over her. Meanwhile, Michelle, who had been resting on the couch in the TV room, woke up and thought she must have dozed off. She reminded herself that it would be a waste to sleep there when she had a nice bed waiting for her. In another scene, Sechan was doing a gaming session with Rebecca and noticed that she was much more cooperative than before. It was the first time she had said, "please," to him, which caught his attention. He asked her what was causing the frustrated look on her face. Rebecca said she couldn't believe him. Suddenly, both of them were shocked when Michelle entered Rebecca's room, turned on the light, and said she needed to talk to them. When Michelle saw Sechan and Rebecca Sechan wearing revealing clothes, she was very surprised and immediately asked what she was doing. Sechan was successfully hiding under the bed, careful not to make a sound. Meanwhile, Michelle was standing nearby, questioning Rebecca rather sharply about why she was wearing such revealing clothes. Rebecca shot back without hesitation, telling Michelle that it was none of her business and that she should mind her own affairs. She added, somewhat sarcastically, that white people tended to run warmer than Asians and questioned what exactly Michelle wanted to talk about. Rebecca made it clear that she was tired and urged Michelle to get to the point quickly. She insisted that since it was just the two of them there, it was the perfect chance to discuss their plan. Rebecca emphasized that if their plan was going to succeed smoothly, gaining Daniel's trust was absolutely crucial. Sechan, sitting behind the bed, listened carefully and thought to himself, wondering what plan Rebecca was talking about. Rebecca told Michelle she didn't need to repeat herself and suggested they postpone the discussion until the next day. Michelle, clearly frustrated by Rebecca's dismissive attitude, asked her if she was seriously going to behave like that. They had agreed to keep things civil between them, after all, but Rebecca was acting so annoying. Michelle's tone showed how exasperated she was. Rebecca finally agreed to talk the next day, turned off the light, and told Michelle to leave the room. As Michelle exited, Sechan crawled out from under the bed and approached Rebecca. He asked her what that whole exchange was about, curious about the plan she had mentioned. Rebecca told him simply that they needed to gain Daddy's trust for the plan to work. Sechan asked if that was really all there was to it. Rebecca responded with irritation, warning him that if he didn't leave immediately, she would scream. Sechan agreed and left without another word. The following day, Sechan was sitting in the yard beside the pool, soaking up the sun as he thought over recent events. He reflected on how they had crossed a certain line once already, yet Rebecca was still appearing in his dreams as if nothing had happened. This perplexed him deeply. He also found himself puzzling over what Michelle had said the previous day. admitting that he couldn't read her intentions at all. He hoped he had misunderstood things, just as Rebecca had suggested. Suddenly, Michelle appeared nearby, telling him that she was going for a swim. Sechan's face lit up with excitement as he told her the water wasn't that cold. As he looked at her, he was surprised to realize she was easier on the eyes than he had initially thought. Michelle noticed his distraction and asked why he seemed lost in thought. Sechan found himself thinking about Rebecca again, admiring how incredible her body was, despite the grumpy expression she often wore. Rebecca soon joined them in the pool and began swimming. Sechan, being a strong swimmer himself, admired her graceful movements and thought seriously that he could not find a single flaw in her appearance. Michelle observed the interaction quietly and thought to herself that Rebecca really needed to take charge and kick Sechan out of the house. She mused that framing him as a stalker would be the best way to get him gone. That was Rebecca's role now. After swimming for a while, Michelle got out of the pool and said she was going to take a break. Sechan settled beside Michelle and reflected on how, come to think of it, he hadn't seen many other Asians around, especially Asian women. He admired how smooth Rebecca's skin was compared to others. Suddenly, Rebecca asked him if he knew how to do the backstroke and begged him to teach her. She teased him about being good at freestyle, but not at backstroke, wondering why.